In the shadowed corridors of Buckingham Palace, where whispers carry more weight than proclamations and secrets hide behind golden frames, one man's loyalty would be tested beyond measure. What happens when the very foundations of trust crumble beneath the weight of a single discovery? When duty collides with truth, and silence becomes the heaviest burden of all? Thomas Fletcher had walked these marble corridors for 23 years, his polished boots echoing against floors that had witnessed centuries of royal history. At 52, he was no longer the eager young guard who had first donned the crimson uniform with trembling hands. Time had seasoned him into something more valuable than a mere protector. He had become a keeper of secrets, a silent witness to the intricate dance of power that played out behind palace walls. The morning of October 15th began like any other. Dawn broke over London with its usual gray promise filtering through the ornate windows of the palace and casting long shadows across the east wing. Thomas completed his routine security check of the residential quarters, his trained eyes scanning for anything amiss. After 2 decades of service, he could detect the slightest deviation from normalcy. A book left open, a curtain drawn differently, a carpet slightly askew. It was this attention to detail that made him pause outside the Duchess Catherine's private chambers. The door, usually securely locked during her morning appointments, stood slightly ajar. Thomas frowned, his hand instinctively moving to the radio clipped to his belt. Protocol dictated that he should report the anomaly immediately, but something made him hesitate. Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge, had been acting strangely for weeks. Thomas had noticed the subtle changes, the way she glanced over her shoulder when walking through the corridors, the nervous habit of checking her phone repeatedly during public appearances, the dark circles under her eyes that no amount of royal makeup could fully conceal. As one of her personal protection officers, he had learned to read her moods, to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. But lately, she had become an enigma even to him. The sound of approaching footsteps made Thomas straighten. He recognized the purposeful stride immediately. Prince William was returning from his morning briefing with the Queen's private secretary. Thomas stepped back into the shadows, a skill perfected over years of providing security while maintaining the illusion of privacy for the royal family. William rounded the corner, his face bearing the weight of responsibilities that seemed to grow heavier with each passing month. At 39, he carried himself with the confidence of a man born to rule, yet Thomas could see the cracks in his armor. The prince's marriage, once the fairy tale that captured the world's imagination, had been showing signs of strain that only those closest to the family could perceive. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Thomas said, stepping forward and offering a respectful nod. William looked up, seemingly pulled from deep thoughts. "Ah, Thomas. Good morning. Is Catherine in her chambers?" "I believe so, sir. I was just conducting the routine security check." Something flickered across William's features. Was it relief or apprehension? Thomas couldn't be sure. "Very good. Carry on." As William disappeared into his wife's chambers, Thomas continued his rounds, but his mind kept returning to that moment. There had been an urgency in the prince's demeanor, a barely contained energy that spoke of important matters weighing heavily on his mind. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm of meetings, appearances, and administrative duties. Thomas found himself assigned to accompany Catherine to a charity luncheon in Westminster, a routine engagement that would normally pass without incident. But as they prepared to leave, he noticed her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted her pearl necklace, a nervous gesture he had never observed before. During the drive through London's bustling streets, Catherine stared out the window with unfocused eyes. The usual small talk about the weather or upcoming events was absent, replaced by a tension that filled the car like static electricity. Thomas, trained to remain professionally invisible, found himself stealing glances at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The luncheon itself was a masterclass in royal composure. Catherine smiled, laughed at appropriate moments, and delivered a speech about children's mental health that moved several attendees to tears. But Thomas, watching from his position near the door, could see the performance for what it was. Her smiles never quite reached her eyes, and her laughter sounded hollow in the acoustics of the grand ballroom. It was during the reception that Thomas received the radio message that would change everything. Fletcher to the East Wing immediately. Priority 1. Priority 1 meant drop everything. Thomas discreetly signaled to his replacement and made his way back to the palace, his mind racing through possibilities. Had there been a security breach? Was there an emergency with one of the other royal family members? He arrived at the East Wing to find Detective Inspector Sarah Collins waiting for him. Collins was Metropolitan Police specializing in cases that touched the royal household, a delicate position that required absolute discretion and unshakable loyalty to the crown. "Thomas," she said, her face grave, "we need to talk. Privately." They made their way to a small office used by security personnel, away from the main corridors where conversations could be overheard. Collins closed the door and activated a white noise generator, standard procedure for sensitive discussions. "There's been a development," she began, her voice low. "We've received intelligence about potential surveillance equipment in the royal quarters. Electronic surveillance, sophisticated stuff." Thomas felt his blood run cold. Surveillance? Of whom? That's what we need to determine. We have reason to believe it's connected to recent security concerns regarding the Duchess of Cambridge. There have been irregularities in her communication patterns, changes in her routine that suggest she may be aware of being monitored. The pieces began falling into place in Thomas's mind. Catherine's paranoia, her nervous glances, the way she had been checking her phone obsessively. What kind of equipment are we talking about? Recording devices. Possibly video. Small, sophisticated, nearly undetectable. The kind of thing that would require intimate access to install. Collins paused, letting the implications sink in. "We need someone with legitimate access to conduct a thorough but discreet search. Someone the family trusts." Thomas understood. After 23 years of faithful service, he was being asked to violate the very privacy he had sworn to protect. The irony was not lost on him. "When do we start?" "Now. The Duchess is at the luncheon for another 2 hours. Prince William is in meetings all afternoon. It's the perfect window." They made their way through the palace corridors, Collins carrying a briefcase filled with detection equipment. Thomas's key card provided access to areas that would normally require multiple authorizations, a privilege that came with his senior position and spotless record. Catherine's private chambers were a sanctuary of cream and gold, filled with personal touches that humanized the formal grandeur of royal life. Family photographs, children's artwork, and carefully chosen books created an atmosphere of warmth that contrasted sharply with the public spaces of the palace. Collins began her methodical search while Thomas stood watch, his radio crackling occasionally with routine security updates. Every sound seemed amplified in the quiet room. The tick of an antique clock, the distant hum of air conditioning, the soft beep of the detection equipment as Collins swept it across surfaces. They searched for 40 minutes without finding anything. Collins was beginning to look frustrated when Thomas noticed something that made his pulse quicken. A section of the ornate baseboard near the bed looked slightly different. The wood stain was a shade lighter, as if it had been recently replaced or disturbed. "Inspector," he called quietly. Collins joined him, her equipment immediately registering an anomaly. "There," she whispered, pointing to a spot where the baseboard met the wall. "Something's definitely there." Using tools from her briefcase, Collins carefully pried away a section of the baseboard. Behind it, nestled in a small cavity, was a device no larger than a matchbox, matte black, with a tiny lens and what appeared to be a high-capacity memory chip. "Jesus," Collins breathed. "This is military grade. Voice activation, motion detection, probably weeks of battery life." Thomas stared at the device, his mind reeling. Someone had been recording Catherine's most private moments, conversations with her husband, phone calls with friends, perhaps even intimate moments. The violation was breathtaking in its audacity and thoroughness. "How long do you think it's been there?" he asked. Collins examined the device more closely. "Based on the dust patterns and the way it's positioned, I'd say at least 3 months, possibly longer. And Thomas..." She paused, her face growing even more serious. "This had to be installed by someone with intimate access to the room, someone who knew the layout, knew when it would be empty, knew how to avoid detection." The implications hit Thomas like a physical blow. The list of people with such access was extremely short: senior household staff, family members, and a handful of trusted security personnel. Someone within their tight circle had betrayed not just Catherine, but the entire institution they had all sworn to protect. "We need to secure this scene," Collins said, replacing the device exactly as they had found it. "And we need to inform Prince William immediately." "No," Thomas said, surprising himself with the firmness of his voice. "Not yet." Collins looked at him sharply. "Thomas, this is a matter of national security. The prince has a right to know." "Of course he does. But think about what we're dealing with here. Someone close enough to the family to plant this device. Someone trusted enough to have unrestricted access. If we move too quickly, if word gets out before we know who's responsible, they'll disappear. And we'll never know how much information was compromised or who else might be involved." Collins considered this, her training as an investigator warring with protocol. "What are you suggesting? Give me 24... Let me observe, ask careful questions, see if I can identify any suspicious behavior. The device is still there, it's still recording. Maybe we can use that to our advantage." "That's risky, Thomas. If something goes wrong, if there's another security breach while we wait, then it's on me." "But Inspector, after 23 years in this job, I know these people. I know their habits, their routines, their tells. Give me a day, and I might be able to narrow down the list of suspects considerably." Collins was quiet for a long moment, weighing the options. Finally, she nodded. 24 hours. "But Thomas, if you sense any immediate danger, any sign that the situation is escalating, you contact me immediately. And if we don't have solid leads by tomorrow evening, we bring in Prince William and let the full investigation begin." They carefully restored the room to its original state, Collins photographing every detail to ensure nothing was out of place. As they prepared to leave, Thomas caught sight of a framed photograph on Catherine's nightstand, a candid shot of her and William laughing at some private joke, their faces radiant with genuine happiness. The contrast between that image and the current reality was heartbreaking. Someone had stolen not just Catherine's privacy, but the security and trust that made such unguarded moments possible. As they left the chambers, Thomas's radio crackled with an update. Duchess returning to palace in 30 minutes. The hunt had begun, and Thomas found himself in the surreal position of investigating the very people he had spent decades protecting. Trust, he realized, was like a delicate porcelain vase. Once cracked, it could never be completely whole again, no matter how skillfully repaired. The next 24 hours would test everything he believed about loyalty, duty, and the price of truth. In the gilded corridors of power, Thomas Fletcher was about to discover that sometimes the greatest threat to the crown came not from enemies outside the palace walls, but from those who walked freely within them. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows as Thomas resumed his duties, his mind racing with possibilities and suspicions. Every face he encountered now carried the potential for betrayal. Every conversation held the possibility of deception. The game had changed, and Thomas was no longer just a guardian of royal secrets. He had become their hunter, the royal secret. Part 2. The evening shift brought a different energy to the palace. Shadows grew longer in the corridors, and the formal bustle of daytime activities gave way to a more intimate atmosphere. Thomas found himself hyper-aware of every detail as he moved through his rounds, his trained eye now viewing familiar faces through the lens of suspicion. Catherine had returned from the charity luncheon appearing drained, her professional facade finally allowed to slip once she was safely within palace walls. Thomas watched from his discreet position as she made her way to her private chambers, noting the way she paused before entering, her hand lingering on the door handle as if steel herself for something. The discovery of the recording device had transformed Thomas's understanding of recent events. Catherine's paranoia wasn't unfounded. It was justified. Someone had indeed been watching, listening, documenting her most private moments. The question that consumed him now was who, and more importantly, why. His investigation would need to be methodical and subtle. After 23 years in service, Thomas knew that information in the royal household flowed like water through carefully constructed channels. The key was understanding those channels and identifying where they might have been compromised. He began with the most obvious suspects, those with regular access to Catherine's private quarters. The list was surprisingly short, but deeply troubling in its implications. There was Margaret Henley, Catherine's personal dresser, who had been with the household for 8 years. James Whitmore, the senior valet who serviced the entire wing. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, Catherine's private physician who made regular visits. And then there were the cleaning staff, maintenance workers, and fellow security personnel. Each name on his mental list represented someone who had sworn loyalty to the crown, someone who had been thoroughly vetted and trusted with the most intimate aspects of royal life. The thought that one of them might be the betrayer left Thomas feeling physically sick. His first opportunity for observation came during the evening meal preparation. Thomas positioned himself in the servants' corridor that ran parallel to the main kitchen, where he could observe staff movements without drawing attention. Through years of experience, he had learned that people's true natures often emerged during routine activities, when their guard was down and they believed themselves unobserved. Margaret Henley arrived precisely on time, as she always did. Thomas studied her carefully. A woman in her mid-40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She moved through her duties with practiced efficiency, but Thomas noticed something he had missed before. She repeatedly checked her phone, and each time she did, her expression grew tense. Phone communications were strictly regulated for household staff, particularly those with access to sensitive areas. Personal calls were permitted during breaks, but the frequency of Margaret's checking suggested something more urgent. Thomas made a mental note to investigate further. James Whitmore presented a different puzzle. The senior valet was a man of few words who had served the royal household for over 15 years. His dedication was legendary among the staff, and he took obvious pride in maintaining the highest standards of service. But as Thomas observed him preparing Catherine's evening attire, he noticed an unusual meticulousness. Whitmore photographed each outfit with his phone before laying it out, claiming it was to maintain records of the Duchess's wardrobe choices. While documentation of royal attire was not unusual, the level of detail Whitmore captured seemed excessive. Thomas watched as the valet photographed not just the clothes, but the entire room layout, including personal items on the dresser and nightstand. It could be innocent attention to detail, or it could be something more sinister. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Thomas encountered Dr. Farrad Morrison leaving Catherine's chambers after an unscheduled visit. The royal physician looked unusually flustered, her normally composed demeanor cracked by what appeared to be significant stress. "Doctor," Thomas greeted her with professional courtesy. "Oh, Thomas, good evening." Her voice carried an odd tremor. "Just a routine checkup, nothing to concern yourself with." But there had been nothing routine about her visit. Thomas had observed Dr. Morrison's interactions with the royal family for years, and this level of agitation was entirely out of character. Moreover, routine medical appointments were always scheduled well in advance and documented through proper channels. This visit had appeared on no official calendar. As Dr. Morrison hurried away, Thomas noticed she was carrying a leather portfolio that seemed unusually thick. Medical files were typically kept in the palace's secure medical facility, not transported in personal bags. Another anomaly to investigate. The evening progressed with Thomas continuing his careful observations while maintaining his regular duties. He escorted Catherine to a private dinner with several close friends, noting her continued nervousness and the way she seemed to choose her words carefully, even in supposedly safe company. Her behavior suggested someone who knew she was being monitored and was struggling to maintain normalcy while protecting sensitive information. It was during this dinner that Thomas received his first real breakthrough. While stationed outside the dining room, he overheard fragments of conversation that made his blood run cold. "Can't continue like this much longer." Catherine's voice, strained and worried. "Perhaps it's time to tell William." This from Lady Sarah, Catherine's closest friend and confidant.
"No, absolutely not."
"Not until I know for certain, if I'm wrong about this." Catherine's voice dropped to nearly a whisper, making the rest of her words inaudible. The conversation confirmed Thomas's suspicions that Catherine was aware of the surveillance and was actively trying to manage the situation on her own. But it also suggested she suspected someone specific, someone whose identity she wasn't ready to reveal even to her husband. After the dinner concluded and the guests departed, Thomas found himself alone with his thoughts in the security office. The weight of what he had discovered pressed down on him like a physical burden. 24 hours earlier, his biggest concerns had been standard security protocols and maintaining the delicate balance between protection and privacy. Now he was investigating a conspiracy that threatened to shake the very foundations of the royal family. His contemplation was interrupted by Detective Inspector Collins, who appeared at the office door with the silent efficiency that marked all her movements. "Any developments?" she asked, settling into a chair across from his desk. Thomas briefed her on his observations, watching as her expression grew increasingly grave. When he finished, she sat in silence for several moments, processing the information. 3 potential suspects, each with means and opportunity, she finally said. But we still don't have motive, and we certainly don't have proof. What's your assessment of each? Margaret Henley is nervous about something, and she's communicating with someone outside normal channels. But she's also been with the household for 8 years without a single security incident. If she's involved, something has changed recently to motivate her. Thomas paused, organizing his thoughts. James Whitmore has access to everything, and appears to be documenting the Duchess's personal space beyond what would be considered normal. But again, 15 years of flawless service. Why would he turn now? And Dr. Morrison? That's the most troubling case. She's clearly distressed about something. She made an unscheduled visit to the Duchess's chambers, and she was carrying documents that shouldn't leave the medical facility. In her position, she would have intimate knowledge of the family's health issues, travel schedules, even psychological assessments. Collins nodded thoughtfully. Medical information would be incredibly valuable to certain parties. Blackmail potential, or intelligence for foreign governments interested in the stability of the monarchy. The conversation was interrupted by Thomas's radio crackling to life. All units, Prince William requesting immediate security briefing in the blue drawing room. Thomas and Collins exchanged glances. Had something happened? Had their investigation been discovered? They made their way through the palace corridors with practiced efficiency, arriving at the blue drawing room to find Prince William pacing restlessly near the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens. His usual composure was notably absent, replaced by an agitation that immediately put Thomas on high alert. "Thomas, thank you for coming so quickly." William turned as they entered, his face bearing the weight of significant stress. "I need to discuss a security matter with you, a very sensitive security matter." Thomas felt his heart rate increase. Had William discovered the recording device? Had Catherine told him about her suspicions? "Of course, Your Royal Highness. How can I be of service?" William glanced at Collins, then back to Thomas. "I need to know if you've observed anything unusual in the past few weeks. Changes in routine, suspicious behavior from staff members. Anything that might indicate a security breach." The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Thomas found himself at a crossroads that would define not just his career, but his integrity. He could reveal what he had discovered, potentially compromising Collins's investigation. Or he could dissemble, buying more time but risking the prince's trust if the deception was later discovered. He chose a middle path. "I have noticed some irregularities, sir. Nothing definitive, but enough to warrant further investigation." William's eyes sharpened. "What kind of irregularities?" "Changes in staff behavior patterns, some anomalous communication activities, unusual access to sensitive areas. I've been conducting a discreet inquiry, but I don't yet have conclusive evidence of any specific security breach." "How long have you been aware of these issues?" Thomas felt the weight of the lie he was about to tell. "Several days, sir. I wanted to gather more information before bringing it to your attention." William studied him intently, and Thomas wondered if the prince could detect the deception. After a moment, William nodded. "I want a full report within 48 hours. Whatever resources you need, whatever authorization is required, you'll have it. This matter takes absolute priority." "May I ask what has prompted this urgency, sir?" William hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "Catherine has been concerned about her privacy lately. She believes someone may be monitoring her activities. I initially thought it might be media-related, but some recent developments suggest the situation may be more serious." "What kind of developments?" Someone has been asking questions. Detailed questions about her schedule, her health, her relationships with staff members. Questions that suggest access to information that should be strictly confidential. Thomas felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting in his mind. The recording device wasn't just gathering information. Someone was actively using that information to conduct intelligence operations against Catherine. "Do we know who has been asking these questions?" "That's what I need you to find out. But Thomas, this investigation must remain absolutely confidential. If word gets out that we suspect internal surveillance, it could cause panic among the staff, and potentially compromise the entire household security structure. After William dismissed them, Thomas and Collins found themselves back in the security office, the complexity of their situation now fully apparent.
"He knows something," Collins said without preamble, "but not everything.
If he knew about the recording device, he would have said so directly. He's operating on suspicions and indirect evidence, which means we still have time to conduct our investigation properly. But Thomas, the stakes just got higher. Someone is actively using the intelligence they're gathering from that device. We're not just dealing with surveillance, we're dealing with operational espionage." Thomas stared out the window at the darkening London skyline, the lights of the city beginning to twinkle like distant stars. Somewhere out there, someone was processing the information stolen from Catherine's most private moments, using it to build a picture of royal family vulnerabilities that could be exploited for any number of purposes. The investigation had evolved from a simple matter of identifying a surveillance device to uncovering what appeared to be a sophisticated intelligence operation targeting the heart of the British monarchy. And Thomas, a man who had spent his entire career protecting the royal family, now found himself in the surreal position of hunting a predator that had already infiltrated their most sacred spaces. Time was running out, and the hunter was about to become the hunted. The Royal Secret, Part 3. The next morning brought an autumn chill that seemed to penetrate even the well-heated corridors of the palace. Thomas arrived early, his mind already racing with the day's investigative priorities. The conversation with Prince William had added new urgency to their search, but it had also provided valuable intelligence about the scope of the operation they were uncovering. Detective Inspector Collins met him in the security office before the day shift officially began, her expression grim with new information. "I've been working through the night," she said without preamble, spreading several files across the desk. "The device we found is even more sophisticated than we initially thought. I had our technical team analyze the photographs I took, and they've identified it as a model that costs upward of £50,000. This isn't amateur hour, Thomas. We're dealing with professional-grade espionage equipment." Thomas studied the technical specifications, his concern deepening with each detail. Voice activation, motion detection, encrypted data transmission. Someone invested serious money in this operation. And that's not all. I've been cross-referencing security logs with staff schedules, looking for patterns that might indicate when the device was installed. Based on the positioning and the dust patterns we observed, I estimate it was placed between 3 and 4 months ago. That narrows our time frame significantly. Collins pulled out a detailed timeline she had constructed. During that period, there were only 6 instances when Catherine's chambers were empty for extended periods and accessible to household staff. I've identified everyone who had legitimate access during those windows. Thomas examined the timeline, noting the names and dates with growing unease. Every person on the list was someone he knew personally, someone whose loyalty he had never questioned. "There's something else," Collins continued. "I've been monitoring communications intercepts, legal ones authorized by the highest levels. Someone has been transmitting encrypted data from within the palace complex. Short bursts, highly compressed, sent during specific time windows, when normal palace communications are at their peak, hiding the transmissions in the background noise of regular activity," Thomas mused. "Clever. Any idea where the signals are going?" "That's where it gets interesting. The signals are being bounced through multiple proxy servers, but our cyber division has traced the ultimate destination. They're going to a private intelligence firm in Switzerland. The kind of operation that specializes in corporate espionage and political intelligence gathering." The implications were staggering. This wasn't a case of simple blackmail or media intrusion. Someone was feeding detailed intelligence about the royal family to a professional espionage organization, the kind that sold information to the highest bidder. Whether that bidder was a foreign government, a political organization, or private interests with their own agenda. "We need to identify the source of those transmissions," Thomas said. "If we can pinpoint the exact location where the signals originate, already in progress. I have technical teams positioning detection equipment throughout the palace complex. We should have location data within hours." Their planning was interrupted by Thomas's radio. "Fletcher to the East Wing immediately. Priority situation." Thomas and Collins exchanged glances. Priority situations were rare in the controlled environment of the palace and usually meant something had gone seriously wrong. They arrived at the East Wing to find Margaret Henley in tears, surrounded by senior household staff and looking utterly distraught. Thomas's first thought was that their investigation had been discovered, but as he drew closer, he realized something entirely different was happening. "She's been dismissed," whispered Mrs. Agnew. Patricia Holbrook, the head housekeeper. Effective immediately. They found irregularities in her background check, things that should have been caught years ago. Thomas felt his investigative instincts sharpen. What kind of irregularities? Financial troubles, apparently. Significant gambling debts that she failed to disclose during her security vetting. There are also questions about some of her associations, people she's been in contact with who have connections to unsavory organizations. Margaret Henley looked up as Thomas approached, her eyes red with tears and desperation. "Thomas, please, you have to believe me. I never did anything to hurt the family. Yes, I had debts, yes, I made mistakes, but I would never, ever betray them." The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Just as their investigation was focusing on potential suspects, one of the primary candidates was being removed from the equation. Either this was an extraordinary stroke of luck, or someone was playing a much more sophisticated game than they had realized. "Margaret," Thomas said gently, "I need you to think very carefully. Has anyone approached you in recent months? Anyone asking questions about the royal family, offering to help with your financial situation, showing unusual interest in your work?" Margaret's eyes darted nervously around the group of staff members before settling back on Thomas. There was someone, a man who said he was from a debt consolidation company. He knew details about my situation that I hadn't told anyone. He offered to help, said he could make my problems disappear if I just provided some basic information about my work schedule. Nothing sensitive. What kind of information did he want? Just routine things. When the family was in residence, when they traveled, what their daily schedules looked like. He said it was for security insurance purposes that wealthy clients required detailed documentation of household activities. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. Margaret had been manipulated, used as an unwitting intelligence asset, while believing she was simply dealing with a financial services company. The sophistication of the operation was becoming clearer. Multiple approaches, redundant sources, carefully constructed cover stories that provided plausible deniability for their assets. "Did you ever meet this man in person?" "Only once, at a coffee shop in Kensington. He seemed very professional, had business cards, official-looking documents. He said his name was David Richardson and that he worked for Sterling Financial Services." Collins, who had been listening intently, made a note. Thomas knew she would have her team investigate the company and the individual, though he suspected both would prove to be elaborate fictions. As Margaret was escorted from the palace, her 23-year career ended in disgrace and confusion. Thomas found himself grappling with a complex mix of emotions. Relief that one potential threat had been neutralized, but also deep concern about the implications of what they had learned. "She was a pawn," Collins said quietly as they watched Margaret's departure. "Used and discarded when she was no longer needed or when she became a liability. Which means the real operatives are still in place," Thomas replied. "Margaret was providing intelligence, but she wasn't sophisticated enough to install or maintain the recording equipment we found. Someone else has that level of access and technical capability." They returned to their investigation with renewed urgency. The technical teams had completed their signal detection sweep and provided Collins with a detailed map of electromagnetic activity throughout the palace complex. Most of the signals were expected. Routine communications, security systems, electronic devices. But there was one anomaly that immediately drew their attention. There. Collins pointed to a location on the digital map. Regular burst transmissions from the medical wing, always during the late evening hours when that section of the palace is normally unoccupied. Thomas studied the location carefully. The medical wing housed Dr. Morrison's office and the palace's private medical facilities. It was also one of the most secure areas in the complex, with access limited to medical staff and senior household personnel. "Dr. Morrison," he said, the pieces falling into place. "She had an unscheduled visit with Catherine yesterday. She was carrying documents that shouldn't leave the medical facility, and now we have evidence of unauthorized transmissions from her area of the palace. But why would she do it? She's been the royal family's physician for over a decade. Her reputation, her career, her entire life is built around serving the monarchy." Thomas had been considering the same question. Dr. Morrison's potential betrayal was perhaps the most troubling of all possibilities because of the intimate nature of medical information and the absolute trust that relationship required. Financial pressure, like Margaret, blackmail, political motivation, Thomas suggested. Or maybe she's been compromised in some way we don't yet understand. Collins checked her watch. Dr. Morrison usually concludes her regular appointments by 6 o'clock. Her office should be empty by 7. That would give us an opportunity to conduct a more thorough investigation. The afternoon passed with agonizing slowness as Thomas maintained his regular duties while anticipating the evening's investigation. He accompanied Catherine to a series of meetings with children's charity representatives, noting that her demeanor had improved slightly since Margaret's departure. Whether this was coincidence or whether Catherine had suspected Margaret's involvement was impossible to determine without direct questioning, something Thomas couldn't risk until they had concrete proof of the conspiracy. It was during one of these meetings that Thomas observed something that would prove crucial to their investigation. Dr. Morrison appeared unexpectedly, claiming she needed to speak with Catherine about scheduling an upcoming medical appointment. The interaction seemed routine, but Thomas noticed Dr. Morrison's careful attention to Catherine's conversation with the charity representatives, almost as if she was memorizing specific details about upcoming public engagements. More troubling was what happened after Dr. Peasy, Morrison, left the meeting. Thomas observed her through a window as she walked across the palace courtyard and saw her pause to make a phone call. The conversation was brief but animated, with Dr. Morrison gesturing emphatically as she spoke. When she ended the call, she immediately deleted something from her phone, likely the call log or a text message. By evening, Thomas and Collins were positioned outside Dr. Morrison's office, equipped with detection devices and lockpicking tools that Collins had acquired through official channels. The medical wing was eerily quiet, with only the distant sounds of palace activity echoing through the corridors. Collins made quick work of the office lock, and they slipped inside, immediately activating their detection equipment. The office was exactly what one would expect of a royal physician. Diplomas and certificates covering the walls, medical texts filling the bookshelves, and a desk covered with patient files and appointment schedules. But the detection equipment immediately registered multiple anomalies. There was an unauthorized wireless transmitter hidden inside what appeared to be a standard medical reference book, and a sophisticated recording device concealed within the office's telephone system. "She's been recording her consultations with the royal family," Collins whispered, her voice filled with disgust. "Every private medical conversation, every health concern, every psychological consultation." Thomas felt sick. The violation of trust was absolute. Dr. Cavish. Morrison had access to the most intimate details of the royal family's physical and mental health. Information that could be used for blackmail, political manipulation, or sold to foreign intelligence services for enormous sums. They photographed everything, without disturbing the setup, building a comprehensive evidence file that would be needed for prosecution. But as they prepared to leave, Collins made one final discovery that changed everything. Hidden in a false bottom of Dr. Morrison's desk drawer was a small collection of items that told a story of coercion and desperation. There were photographs of Dr. Morrison in compromising situations, clearly taken without her knowledge. There were copies of forged medical documents that could destroy her professional reputation. And most damning of all, there was a letter written in Dr. Morrison's own handwriting, begging for the return of her daughter. "They have her daughter," Collins said, her voice barely audible. "Dr. Morrison isn't a willing participant. She's being blackmailed." The revelation transformed their understanding of the entire operation. Dr. No began to see this cause. Morrison wasn't a traitor motivated by greed or ideology. She was a victim, forced to betray the family she had served faithfully for over a decade in order to protect her own child. As they carefully restored the office to its original state, Thomas found himself grappling with the moral complexity of the situation. Dr. Morrison had committed serious crimes, violated her oath as a physician, and betrayed the trust of the royal family. But she had done so under duress that few people could imagine resisting. "We need to find her daughter," Thomas said as they left the medical wing. "And we need to identify who's running this operation before they realize we're closing in." Collins nodded grimly. The Swiss intelligence firm was just the tip of the iceberg. Someone with serious resources and ruthless methods is orchestrating this entire operation. And if they're willing to kidnap a young woman to ensure Dr. Davi, Morrison's cooperation, they won't hesitate to escalate further if they feel threatened. As they walked through the darkened corridors of the palace, Thomas realized that their investigation had evolved far beyond a simple case of surveillance. They were now dealing with international espionage, kidnapping, and blackmail, crimes that threatened not just the royal family's privacy, but potentially the stability of the monarchy itself. The hunter had become the hunted, and the stakes had just become lethal. The Royal Secret, Part 4. The revelation about Dr. Morrison's daughter transformed the investigation from a methodical search for evidence into a race against time. Thomas found himself pacing the security office in the early hours of the morning, his mind churning through the implications of what they had discovered. Somewhere, a young woman was being held captive to ensure her mother's compliance in an espionage operation that reached to the highest levels of the British monarchy. Detective Inspector Collins had been working through the night, coordinating with various law enforcement agencies to trace Dr. Baker, Morrison's daughter Elizabeth, a 24-year-old graduate student who had supposedly been studying abroad in Switzerland for the past 6 months. What they discovered was deeply disturbing. Elizabeth Morrison never enrolled in any Swiss university, Collins reported, her face haggard from exhaustion but her eyes sharp with determination. Her student visa application was processed through a shell company that we now know is connected to the same network as the Swiss intelligence firm. She was lured to Switzerland under false pretenses and has been held there ever since. Thomas felt a cold rage building in his chest. The sophistication and ruthlessness of the operation was breathtaking. These weren't amateur criminals or opportunistic blackmailers. They were professionals who had spent months, possibly years, setting up an operation designed to penetrate the very heart of the royal household. Do we have any leads on her location? Swiss authorities are cooperating, but it's complicated. The intelligence firm operates through multiple shell companies and has facilities in at least 3 different cantons. It could take days to search them all, and by then, Collins didn't need to finish the sentence. If the conspirators realized their operation was being uncovered, Elizabeth Morrison could disappear permanently, leaving her mother with no choice but to continue her cooperation or face the consequences. We need to move carefully, Thomas said. If we spook them, if they realize we know about Elizabeth, they might cut their losses and eliminate the evidence, including Dr. Carissa, Morrison herself, Collins agreed grimly. And possibly Elizabeth as well. We're dealing with people who have already demonstrated they're willing to kidnap and coerce. Murder wouldn't be a significant escalation for them. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Prince William, who appeared in the security office looking as if he hadn't slept. His usual composure was completely absent, replaced by barely controlled anxiety that immediately put Thomas on high alert. "I need to speak with you both," William said without preamble. "Catherine received a call last night, someone claiming to have detailed knowledge of our private conversations, our personal habits, even our medical information. They made it clear that they have been monitoring us for months." Thomas felt his heart sink. The conspiracy was moving into its final phase, transitioning from intelligence gathering to active exploitation. "What do they want, sir?" "Information. They claimed to know about certain sensitive matters involving the family. Things that could cause significant embarrassment if made public. They wanted detailed intelligence about upcoming state visits, security arrangements, private family discussions about policy matters." William paused, struggling with the admission. "They made it clear that they already possessed enough information to cause serious damage to the monarchy's reputation. The call wasn't really a negotiation. It was notification that Catherine was now working for them, whether she agreed or not."
The audacity was staggering.
The conspirators had moved beyond covert surveillance to open extortion, confident that their intelligence gathering had provided them with sufficient leverage to control a member of the royal family directly. "Did they specify what kind of sensitive information they claimed to possess?" Collins asked carefully. William's expression grew even more strained. "Private conversations between Catherine and myself about family members, including discussions about my father's health, concerns about my brother's recent behavior, and detailed knowledge of our children's schedules and activities. Information that could only come from inside our most private spaces." Thomas and Collins exchanged glances. The recording device they had found had captured far more than they had initially realized. The conspirators now possessed intelligence that could be used to manipulate royal family dynamics, influence policy decisions, or create public relations disasters that could shake the foundation of the monarchy. "Sir," Thomas said carefully, "I need to share some information that may help explain how this situation developed." He briefed William on their investigation, revealing the discovery of the recording device, the evidence of Dr. Morrison's coercion, and the international scope of the espionage operation. William listened in stunned silence, his face growing paler as the full extent of the betrayal became clear. "Dr. Morrison," he said finally, his voice hollow. "She's delivered my children. Treated Catherine through difficult pregnancies, been a trusted advisor for over a decade. They turned her into a weapon against us by threatening her daughter. She's as much a victim as you are, sir," Thomas said gently. "The people orchestrating this operation are ruthless professionals who identified vulnerabilities and exploited them without mercy." William stood abruptly and began pacing, his hands clasped behind his back. A gesture Thomas recognized from years of observing the prince during moments of intense stress. "What do they really want?" William asked. "This level of operation, this investment in resources and time, it can't be about simple blackmail or selling information to tabloids." Collins consulted her notes. "Based on our analysis of their methods and the intelligence firm they're using, we believe this is a long-term operation designed to create leverage over the royal family for political purposes. The information they've gathered could be used to influence British policy decisions, manipulate public opinion during critical moments, or destabilize the monarchy during periods of constitutional crisis. Foreign intelligence? Possibly, though the shell companies make it difficult to determine the ultimate source of funding. It could be a hostile nation-state, a political organization opposed to the monarchy, or even private interests with specific policy objectives." Thomas's radio crackled with an urgent message that made his blood run cold. "All units, medical emergency in the East Wing. Dr. Morrison's office, immediate response required." The three of them rushed through the palace corridors, arriving at the medical wing to find chaos. Dr. Morrison was on the floor of her office, unconscious but breathing, with what appeared to be the remnants of a shattered teacup nearby. The acrid smell of almonds hung in the air, a telltale sign of cyanide poisoning. "She's alive, but barely," reported the paramedic who had arrived first on scene. "Looks like she ingested something, but not enough to be fatal. Could be a suicide attempt that she changed her mind about, or someone trying to silence her permanently." As Dr. Morrison was rushed to the palace's medical facility, Thomas surveyed her office with new eyes. Everything appeared normal except for a single detail that chilled him to the bone. The false bottom drawer where they had found evidence of her coercion was open and empty. "They know," he said to Collins. "Somehow, they know we've discovered the operation." Collins was examining the broken teacup. The poison was in her tea, but the dosage was carefully calculated. This wasn't meant to kill her. It was meant to incapacitate her and send a message. "They're cleaning house." Prince William, who had been standing in stunned silence, suddenly spoke with quiet authority. "This ends now. I want this operation dismantled completely, everyone involved arrested, and my family's security restored. Whatever resources you need, whatever authority is required, you have it." Over the next several hours, the investigation shifted into high gear. Collins coordinated with international law enforcement agencies while Thomas worked with palace security to identify and neutralize any remaining surveillance equipment. The Swiss authorities, operating on intelligence provided by Collins, conducted simultaneous raids on 3 facilities connected to the intelligence firm. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m., when Swiss police successfully located Elizabeth Morrison at a private facility outside Geneva. She was physically unharmed but had been held under psychological duress for 6 months, believing that any attempt to escape or contact authorities would result in her mother's death. With Elizabeth's safety secured, Dr. Morrison's recovery accelerated dramatically. She had indeed attempted suicide, unable to bear the weight of betraying the family she had served faithfully for over a decade. But the dose of poison she had ingested was not sufficient, and her survival provided investigators with the final pieces they needed to unravel the entire conspiracy. In a series of interviews conducted under carefully controlled conditions, Dr. Morrison revealed the full scope of the operation. The initial approach had come 18 months earlier, when she was contacted by individuals claiming to be conducting a medical research study on stress-related health issues in high-profile families. The study appeared legitimate, with proper credentials and institutional backing. Gradually, however, the requests became more invasive and specific. When Dr. P. Wales, Morrison expressed discomfort, the researchers revealed they had compromising information about her professional practices, forged evidence of prescription drug abuse that could end her career and result in criminal charges. The final stage of coercion came when Elizabeth was offered a prestigious fellowship in Switzerland. By the time Dr. Morrison realized her daughter was being held, she was too deeply compromised to seek help without destroying her own life and potentially endangering Elizabeth further. The recording devices, the intelligence gathering, the systematic violation of royal privacy. All of it had been orchestrated by a network that Collins's investigation eventually traced to a private intelligence firm working for a consortium of political organizations opposed to the British monarchy's influence in international affairs. James Whitmore, the senior valet whose photographic documentation of Catherine's chambers had aroused suspicion, proved to be entirely innocent. His detailed record-keeping was indeed excessive, but it stemmed from an almost pathological attention to detail, rather than any malicious intent. Margaret Henley, the personal dresser whose financial troubles had made her a target for manipulation, was also cleared of any intentional wrongdoing. The real criminals were the professionals who had identified vulnerabilities in trusted household staff and exploited them with ruthless efficiency. The cleanup operation took several weeks to complete. Every electronic device in the royal quarters was replaced. All security protocols were updated, and extensive background investigations were conducted on every staff member with access to sensitive areas. Dr. Morrison, her daughter, safely returned, faced criminal charges for her role in the conspiracy, but received a suspended sentence in recognition of the coercion she had endured. She resigned from her position as royal physician and relocated to a small practice in rural Scotland, seeking the anonymity and peace that had been stolen from her during 18 months of living as an unwilling spy. Catherine, freed from the constant anxiety of knowing she was being watched, gradually returned to her normal routines. The strain of maintaining composure while knowing her most private moments were being recorded had taken a significant toll, but with the threat eliminated, her natural resilience began to reassert itself. Prince William, perhaps most affected by the revelation of how thoroughly their privacy had been violated, implemented new security measures that balanced protection with the openness that made the monarchy accessible to the British people. The experience had taught him that the price of public service included vulnerabilities that hostile forces would always seek to exploit. Thomas Fletcher, having successfully protected the royal family from a threat they hadn't even known existed, received a commendation for his discretion and dedication. But for him, the real reward was the restoration of trust within the household, and the knowledge that he had helped preserve the institution he had spent his entire adult life serving. The conspiracy had been defeated, but its lessons lingered. In an age of sophisticated surveillance technology and professional espionage operations, privacy was not a given but a constant battle. The royal family, like all public figures, would forever live with the knowledge that hostile forces were constantly seeking ways to penetrate their defenses and exploit their vulnerabilities. Yet life continued within the palace walls with its rhythms of duty, service, and the quiet moments of humanity that made the burden of public life bearable. The threat had been neutralized, the betrayers had been exposed, and the crown endured, as it had for centuries, adapting to new challenges while maintaining its essential character. In the end, Thomas reflected as he walked the familiar corridors on his evening rounds, the greatest protection of the monarchy was not technology or security protocols, but the dedication of ordinary people who understood that some institutions were worth defending, no matter the personal cost. The palace lights dimmed as London settled into evening quiet, and Thomas Fletcher continued his vigilant watch, guardian of secrets that would never be revealed, protector of trust that could never be perfectly secured, but servant of an ideal that would always be worth the effort to preserve.